Welcome back. It's been an especially troubling time for commercial aviation with 3 high-profile accidents over the last year or so involving planes departing from Indonesia, one of which disappeared, the other which was shot down over the Ukraine, and a third, Air Asia Flight 8501, which late last month crashed into the Java Sea.
As the search for the missing Air Asia flight near Indonesia continues, markets are worrying about the airline. An early fall in the share price of the group in Kuala Lumpur, a predictable result of losing an aircraft with 162 people on board. The latest suggestion that flight QZ8501 could be at the bottom of the sea puts the safety of Asian flights under scrutiny. Air Asia CEO Tony Fernandez.
No one could guarantee that the airline is 100% safe. But I think in 13 years we've carried 220 million people, and until today we have never lost a life.
This is the first major accident for Air Asia since its budget operations began in 2002. In that time, the airline has rapidly expanded, starting with just 2 aircraft and now counting around 80 in its fleet. This is the latest in a disastrous year for Malaysia-affiliated airlines. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 went missing in March, carrying 239 passengers. It still hasn't been found. Then in July, the same airline's flight MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. Questions too now about Indonesia's safety reputation. That's in a market projected to be one of the 10 biggest by 2020. Germany's Allianz has said it was the aircraft's lead reinsurer. It was also the main insurer for flight MH370 and flight MH17. The Airbus A320 is known as one of the safest passenger planes. More than 6,000 are used by around 300 airline operators across the world. Aircraft operators and manufacturers will be closely following developments in this latest tragedy.
Now, to discuss this latest crash and those that came before, we are joined by former pilot Albert Goldson. Professor of Media Studies Jackie Guzda has also returned, and via Skype, John Goglia, who is an aviation safety expert. Let's start with the pilot first, because that's what it's all about, actually, the control of the jet. The latest indications show that this plane pancaked into the Java Sea. What does that tell you?
Well, basically, it seems very similar, almost a deja vu to the Air France incident several years ago. In
when
which
they were going over the Atlantic. Correct.
Ran into very similar severe weather. The pilots were disoriented because the instruments gave conflicting information. Right. They lost control of the plane with respect to stalling, and it crashed, pancaked into the sea, and they have the same type of debris field that would indicate that the aircraft did stall and pancake into the ocean.
We're speculating now because they haven't found the black boxes.
Of course.
But is that what your gut is telling you?
Yes, it is. Again, they ran into a very similar situation of running into very severe weather. The difference here is in Asian airspace, it's up to the pilots to make their call as far as how to navigate severe weather systems. In Europe and the United States, it's a collaborative effort between the pilot as well as air traffic control on how they are to negotiate that weather system.
So let me get this straight. It's more pilot-driven in Indonesia. He or she will make the decision with regard, and not so much a collaborative effort.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get John Goglia up from his hookup in Skype. He's a former member of the National Transportation Safety Board. More than 30 years of experience in the aviation industry. Do you concur with Pilot Goldson?
Oh, that is one possible explanation. We really don't have enough information to narrow down to any one cause. That is a possible cause. Icing the pitot system is what he's talking about, which gave false indications to the computers and the pilots that are flying the airplane. But we haven't ruled out a host of other issues that could have caused this problem as well.
What other issues do you see, or what other possible causes do you see?
Well, the next one on the list is pilot error, not necessarily caused by the weather, but inappropriate manipulations of the controls. We know that the Airbus tail has broken at least once before, and we've had a few near misses with overstressing the tail. So that's a possibility, given the strength of the storm. I've heard people say that they think that the engines were icing up. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that's the case. We haven't ruled out a criminal act either. You know, in the lead to this article, you mentioned the 3 previous crashes, but the second crash in Malaysia is an act of terror, and not an accident, not an aviation accident.
Yes. All right, let's hope.
The first one has more than way over a 50% chance of being a terrorist act as well.
All right, let's hold you up right there. The way this was conveyed apparently to the people on the ground, the families who were waiting for word, is they found out, unfortunately, accidentally. They saw it on TV. As a media professor, did they convey this? Obviously, they did not in the right way, but was there a way to do this better?
Well, the public has got to know.
Yeah.
The public takes air transportation. Right. There's no way that we can censor something like that, but it's a fine line, isn't it? I mean, there was one case about a woman who said her brother never took Air Asia because that is like the Ryanair of Malaysia. And so she was in tears. She had found out from the news that her brother, who she never believed would take that airline, was on that flight.
All right, well, Mr. Goglia, should we be concerned, or should the world be concerned that the airlines in Indonesia or those particular airlines are not operated as well as they should be?
Well, you know, we all rely upon the regulatory authorities, the government, to enforce the regulations. And the regulations have a basis in the ICAO rules, the International Civil Aviation Organization. They give us a baseline. And if the country is not enforcing those rules, then you're running at a higher risk. Even though you're running at a higher risk, it doesn't mean an accident is inevitable. It just means the probability is higher. So you really have to look at each and every one of these as individuals and discover all the facts before you make a conclusion.
All right, we're going to come back to this in just a moment, but while we have you here, Pilot Goldson and also Mr. Goglia and Jackie, let's discuss, if we can, the missing Malaysia flight, which is still a mystery all these months later and is not hide nor hair of that plane. Is there any theories, working theories, that you have heard, either one of you? Mr. Goglia?
Well, I can tell you that there's a tremendous amount of work going on every single day trying to find that airplane, whether it be the people out on the ships, people on shore going over every possible piece of data they have and going over it again and again and again. And I know folks in Seattle at Boeing are doing the same thing. Everybody wants to find that airplane or the wreckage of that airplane. So there is a lot of effort going on.
That particular flight, if it did indeed hit the waters, is more than 2 miles down. This is a different situation, Albert, in that the Java Sea in that area is about 100 feet. So it should be easier to recover not only the black boxes, but to figure this out. Do you concur?
Absolutely. It's a much different situation in the Java Sea, but the average depth is between 80 and 100 feet. So recovering any parts of the aircraft is significantly easier. The other flight that disappeared over the Indian Ocean, not only has it not really been mapped out, it's the 3rd deepest ocean in the world, and it would be very difficult to recover any sort of parts of the aircraft once they finally discover or come up with the debris field.
You know, we haven't discussed the automation of jets now, which you essentially can fly without really flying them. I spoke with the pilot years ago. He said, Frank, it could essentially take off by itself, and thanks to GPS and everything else, fly itself and essentially land by itself. Are pilots not being trained, Mr. Goglia and Albert, are they not being trained in taking manual control of a plane when it doesn't have that mechanism?
Most of the aircraft coming out are so modern that they can literally fly themselves.
Yes.
Unfortunately, a lot of the newer pilots that are coming in are trained on a lot of the modern machines and the aircraft in which they do not have enough hands-on manual experience with these large aircrafts with respect to coming up with an unusual situation. In other words, to be able to feel the aircraft, what might be right, what might be wrong, etc. So lack of that experience really compounds an emergency situation in which they really have to take control of the aircraft.
Not only experience, but overwork. If you remember when that jet landed into the Hudson River,
yes,
and Sully, who was the captain, who everybody lauded because he safely landed that aircraft, he testified before Congress and said, look what is happening to my industry. You know, people are overworked. The pilots are overworked. There was a crash outside of Buffalo,
yes,
where the co-pilot actually had a part-time job,
yes,
walking dogs to make
yes,
ends
yes,
meet. And so, you know, Sully was saying that what we need to do is give more attention to the pilots, the crew, and make sure they can fly safely.
And Mr. Goglia, do you agree as well? Are planes maybe over-automated in this day and age, and the pilots really are not experienced as they should be?
I can actually make a case that because of automation, we need to train our pilots additionally, not less. For a long time now, the industry has been saying because of the automation, they can train more in the simulator, they can put less hours in the training syllabus for pilots. And I believe that because of the automation, we actually need to add time. You need to teach not only the automation, but then you need to teach around the automation when something goes bad.
Is it a money issue?
A large part of it is, yes. But that goes across the whole industry. You know, there is not one airline you can single out in this area. The entire industry has been driving down their training costs for a long time, and the automation has been the reason behind that.
Okay, John Goglia, thank you very much for joining us. Jackie, as usual, and thank you for giving us a view inside the cockpit, which is always helpful. We appreciate that as well. Albert Goldson. We'll be back, and when Fresh Outlook continues, the tense relationship between the New York City Police Force and New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and how it got so bad so fast.